Thanks everyone for coming. So psychedelics are obviously in the news. They're pretty popular for curing depression, helping with spiritual insights or creative kind of initiative. But microdosing seems to be kind of occupying an adjacent but similar sweep of interest by the public mind. But there's not too much clarity on what the science says about microdosing. So we thought it'd be good to have an event to kind of get some clarity on that. So this man next to me, Balazs, am I saying your name right?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Cool, pretty good. Balazs hit me up and we got a coffee and he told me about this study that he designed and initiated in collaboration with Imperial College on microdosing, a self-blinding study that he designed the methodology for, that he is going to share with us, and also give us an overview of the science in the context of what the science currently does say about microdosing. So without further ado, could we please give a warm welcome to Balazs, everybody.
All right, thank you everybody for coming. Let's get started. So currently we are in the second golden era of psychedelics research. And I think it is fair to say that within this era, microdosing has emerged as this new and exciting way of using psychedelics. But what is microdosing? And that immediately brings us to an important point. And that is that microdosing is not this singular, well-defined phenomena. Rather, it should be understood as this fuzzy space of low-dosing psychedelics. Broadly speaking, what microdosing is the regular use of low dose of psychedelics. Typically, people take about 10% of what you would do on average in a recreational setting. So in the case of LSD, most people do somewhere around 100 to 200 micrograms, and the microdose is somewhere between 10 to 20. Different people have different preferences. But that's roughly what microdosing is. If you Google around about microdosing, there's not going to be a shortage of content on the internet. And the content that you're going to find, broadly speaking, falls into one of two categories. And category one is the guide. How you should microdose, how often you should microdose, what dosage you should use, at what frequency you should dose, and so on, the practicalities of microdosing. The other very frequent category are the experience reports. I microdosed, and this is how it made me feel. And I'm in a lucky position that there are plenty of content on both of these topics, because I'm not going to cover either of these in any depth. Instead, what I would like to really focus is on the science. What is it that we do know scientifically about microdosing? What are some of the known unknowns about microdosing? And how our own study, the self-blinding microdose study, fits into the larger picture of psychedelics and microdosing research. But before I would dive into the details of the study, I would really like to set the stage of why we think this is such a cool study. So what I'm first going to do is to walk you through all of the scientific literature that is out there on microdosing in humans. It's not going to take me a lot of time because there is not a whole lot. And then after that, I'm going to talk about the placebo effect. And I want you to see it more broadly, not as a sugar pill, but as a psychological expectation. That's what really the placebo effect is. And then last but not the least, I'm going to talk a little bit about the study and how it all comes together. So with that out of the way, let's get going. So first I want to talk about studies of old. These are all studies that were done in the first wave of psychedelic research from the 1950s up until the 1970s. What you need to understand first is that at that time, microdosing was not hyped, it was not a buzzword, and accordingly, there was not a whole lot of dedicated research on microdosing. However, LSD has this interesting property that I'm sure many of you know, that it is psychoactive in incredibly small quantities. As I said, most people take about 100 to 200 micrograms in a recreational setting, which is 100 to 200 times 1/1,000,000th of a gram. Now that is a very, very small quantity. For most other psychoactive substances, such as cocaine, amphetamines, or ketamine, the active dose is somewhere around 100 to 1,000 times higher than with LSD. So LSD is psychoactive in these incredibly small quantities, and that very naturally leads to the question, is that what is the lowest dose that people can reliably detect? What is the threshold dose for LSD? And people in this first wave of psychedelic research looked into it. And what I have in this table here up 4 studies that were done on this topic. And if you very quickly run just your eyes through the outcomes, what you are going to see is that nobody has really detected anything reliably under 20 micrograms, but at 30 micrograms and above that, there seems to be, people seem to be reliably able to distinguish the LSD from the placebo. So somewhere this threshold dose is in the 20 to 30 range, according to these studies. Now notice that, as I said previously, that most microdosers today are doing it with somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20 micrograms. So it's lower than this threshold dose, and it immediately leads to the question, whether does that mean that microdosing is not working? And no, not really, because here we are talking about 2 independent questions. What these studies were trying to address is that what is the threshold dose? When you are breaking blind, as they say it in science, you're breaking blind in an experiment when you can figure out whether you are in the placebo or in the active group. And that is a related but not identical question whether the drug has an effect. It very well could be the case that, say, 10 micrograms of LSD is not strong enough so that you can reliably distinguish it from the placebo, but you just always happen to have a good day. If you're doing placebo-controlled microdosing, then you have a good day and you are just unsure whether it is one of those naturally occurring good days or whether the good day is induced by microdosing. So in itself, that this threshold dose where you are certainly able to distinguish it from the placebo is higher than the microdose does not necessarily mean that microdosing is ineffective. So next I want to move on to some of the more recent research that was done on microdosing. And the first thing that I would like you to notice is that the oldest study that is up here is from 2018. That's how recently science has started to really examine microdosing. I don't want to get lost too much in the details with these studies, but I will very quickly run through on this table. So the first 2 studies that you see here, the Polito and the Petranker study, both of these are like these internet-based survey studies, meaning that they set up an internet survey, they recruit people on the internet, and they're doing uncontrolled microdosing at home at their own initiative. And broadly speaking, what these studies have found is very much confirming what many of those anecdotal reports on the internet are claiming about microdosing. Specifically, the Polito study says that acutely, so when you're under the influence of the drug, generally you have a higher well-being. They specifically measured connectedness, contemplation, creativity, focus, happiness, and productivity. Basically, everything is better. This other study, the Petranker study, they were not interested in the acute effects. Rather, they were interested in the personality traits of the microdosers. And what they have found is that they had lower scores of dysfunctional attitude and negative emotionality, but they had higher scores on wisdom, open-mindedness, and creativity. This was a cross-sectional study, so there was one time point, so it has this classic problem that correlation does not equal causation. It very well could be the case that people who have these preferable traits are just more likely to microdose than people who are not. But anyway, these 2 studies, these 2 internet survey studies, are really the only 2 studies that are providing, at this point, some preliminary scientific evidence that microdosing can increase well-being. The study in the middle, the Prochakova study that was done in the Netherlands, actually at the psychedelic meetup, in the Netherlands, psilocybin-containing magic truffles are legal. And what they were doing is that people basically completed a measure of creativity scores at baseline, then they microdosed with the truffles, and then they completed the same task again. And they found this increase in convergent and divergent thinking, but fluid intelligence was not affected. One thing that I should quickly add here is that this dose, or sorry, the dose of the magic truffles in this study is a little bit higher than what you would normally consider a microdose, so it's more like a mini-dosing study. But anyway, the point is that this study is the only one which is currently providing some, again, preliminary evidence that microdosing can increase cognitive functioning. Oh, and sorry, I forgot to mention, but this was an open label study, meaning that there was no placebo control. People knew that they are going to give a psilocybin containing magic truffles. That's going to be important later on. These last two studies, they are the only two double-blinded clinical studies done on microdosing. So these are the only two studies that are up to what we consider gold standard in modern medicinal research. And this first study, the Yanakieva 2018 study, they basically had 4 dose groups, 0, 5, 10, and 20 micrograms. They had 48 people overall, so 12 in each group. And what they have found is that there was this improvement, what neuroscientists call the time interval reproduction task. I don't want to go too much into the details. It's exactly what it sounds like, that basically people are better estimating the length of time intervals in the range of 0.2 seconds to 4 seconds. And that's really what they found. And that's really the only thing that they have found. They have found these small but statistically non-significant effects on thought patterns, perception, and concentration. But this was really this time interval reconstruction test. That was the only one which was statistically significant. And there is some indirect evidence and argument how this test result could hint that cognitive benefits, that microdosing has cognitive benefits, but the study did not detect them directly. The last study, the DeWitt study 2019, this was done at the University of Chicago. It just came out a few weeks ago. It also had dose groups somewhat distinct from the previous study. They had 20 people here, but here all of the 20 people did all 4 of the dose groups. And again, what they found is that they did not find anything that would be statistically significant on the behavioral and cognitive effects. They find some these modest dose-related subjective effects. And what that really means is that they ask the participants to basically rate how likely they are to be on drugs. And if you make a plot across these 4 dose conditions, then the more dose they took, the more likely is that they said that they are on the drug. And at the 26 microgram level, that was the result was statistically significant, meaning that people were able to distinguish it from placebo above the chance level. So that is it. That is everything that is science and is out there about microdosing. If you feel that it's not so exciting and you feel a little disappointed, I'm right there with you. And that's exactly why I wanted to be very explicit about going through all of these studies. Before we would conclude about the science part, I would just like you to notice one more thing on this slide, because this is going to be later very important. For these internet-based survey studies, there are hundreds of participants. For these clinical studies, there's 48 and 20, much, much less. And that's not by accident. If you're doing an internet-based survey study, that's going to be relatively cheap. It's easy to recruit participants because you can recruit from throughout the globe. And it doesn't matter how many people sign up, your costs are likely to stay flat. If you're doing a clinical study, it's going to be very expensive. Not because LSD would be expensive, but because of all of the regulatory and administrative overheads that are imposed by LSD being a Schedule I substance. So there is this really big discrepancy in the number of participants, and that's important because statistically speaking, you always want to be a very large sample size in your study, because the more people are enrolled in your study, the smaller the statistical noise is going to be. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these effects that these people have detected but did not reach statistical significance, they might be some of them true effects. It's just as simply when you have 20 participants, you do not have the statistical power to clear that that effect is more than just due to chance. So that is why having a large sample size is always critical in the studies. But unfortunately, due to the very high cost, that's incredibly difficult to do in a clinical study on psychedelics. So before summarizing the science part, I would just like to take a really small detour about this figure, which you can find basically in every medical and scientific textbook. And what this figure is trying to communicate is that not all scientific studies are equal. Depending on their methodologies, different studies are carrying different way of evidence. So these case reports that you see down here, they are roughly those anecdotal reports that the internet is completely filled with. And then what you see here towards the top, the high-quality studies, these are these randomized controlled trials that we saw that microdosing only has 2. And then at the top of the food chain is the meta-analysis, the statistical synthesis of multiple randomized controlled studies. Now, before placing microdosing on this triangle, I would just like to give you some context and talk for 1 minute about another big development in psychedelic research, and that is the development of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. As many of you may know, that currently in the US, that is in phase 3 of clinical studies, meaning that it's very likely to be an approved form of medication within the next 5 to 10 years. So in this current phase 3 of clinical studies with MDMA, there are going to be about somewhere between 200 to 300 people involved in the studies, all of them in this randomized controlled setting. And I could be wrong of this number, but I think there are going to be at least 6 independent study sites led by 6 independent investigators. And that is just phase 3. Before that, in phase 2, there were, I think, about another 100 people involved, and there were also a bunch of these other lower-level studies also conducted on the subject matter. So when MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is going to be approved, then roughly there are going to be somewhere between 300 to 500 people who have been involved in the research, all of them in this randomized controlled clinical setting. And in the case of the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, there are very strong indications that it's working. So where are we in microdosing? So we have 2 of these studies only, 6 to 8 people combined, and they really didn't find anything. We also have a bunch of like these lower level studies, like the internet-based studies, but they are really not going to carry a lot of weight because there is this missing link, which is the placebo effect. So the point here is that if you would like to review the science of microdosing today, then you have to conclude that it is not evidence-based. I don't want to be a joy killer, and unfortunately I have to say this, but you know, I think for us, the scientific community, is very important to emphasize this, that there's a lot of hype out about microdosing, but the science is miles behind that. But of course, the catch is that I said there is no evidence in favor of microdosing, but there is also no evidence against microdosing. What I'm just saying is that currently today, there is just not, if you're somebody who believes in the values of skepticism and science, and if you review all of the empirical evidence that's out there in the peer-reviewed scientific literature, then you cannot rationally arrive at the conclusion that microdosing is working. So why is the science not moving forward? There's obviously a lot of buzz around about microdosing, and the simple answer is really money. Doing these experiments is very expensive to do. LSD cannot be patented. The patent has long expired, so there is little motivation for private investors to come in and pick up the bill at the end of the day. So there is this chicken and an egg problem with microdosing research, that in order to get to the high-quality studies, you need to get a lot of money. But in science, if you want to get a lot of money, then you have to have some evidence that what you're going to do is going to produce some results. And currently, that is completely lacking in microdosing. This problem, this chicken and egg problem of getting money and the high-quality evidence, that's always present in biomedical research. But in the context of microdosing, is just magnified by the fact that doing experiments with psychedelics is much more expensive than with many other, with non-controlled substances. So that's really the issue, and the reason why it's hard to get the money, because like these internet-based studies, many people are very skeptical of them within the scientific community, and they're skeptical of it because there are many good reasons to believe that at least a large portion of the effects can be completely explained by the placebo effect. So now we arrive at the second part of the presentation. So, yeah, I think it's a good one, and it really captures, like, what I like about it is that it's not just that, you know, it's gluten-free, which is obviously another buzzword, but it's also more expensive. So there are, like, you know, 2 signs that tells you that this placebo is better than just the regular one, and that's actually scientifically an important point. So anyway, what is placebo? Placebo is a medically ineffectual treatment that is intended to deceive the patient that she is receiving an active medicine. And it has been demonstrated in a number of medical contexts that patients generally do feel better after such a placebo treatment. This has been demonstrated in depression and performance enhancements and a number of other medical contexts as well. I opened the presentation by saying that microdosing is an umbrella term and it's a fuzzy concept, and placebo is also a little bit like that. It's an umbrella term that has many components that includes your prior experiences, your conditioning, the verbal suggestions that you're receiving from the experimenter. But really the key term is expectation. Placebo is about your expectations and your mental attitudes about an upcoming treatment. And to illustrate that a little bit, I would like to invite you in a thought experiment that actually I would really like to do in the real life one day. And the experiment is about meditation. We are going to have two groups of people meditating. And group one is going to be a lot of people who are probably like many microdosers. They are really into Eastern philosophy. They go to yoga class. And they're at least vegetarian, but most likely vegan. In the other group, we are going to have a lot of people, actually like my father, who was raised in a very academic family. His father was a professor of philosophy, so he was really raised in the context of Western philosophy, and throughout his adult life, he was this very down-to-earth guy who is very much committed to scientific materialism. So we get a bunch of guys like him as well, and everybody goes together 1 month retreat in the Himalayas, and they are meditating. What would be the outcome after the months of the meditation retreat? And I think what we would see is that there would be benefits in both groups, but probably the benefits in the first group, the hippie group, would be much greater than in the second group. And it's not hard to see why. Like, most of those people would already be very enthusiastic about going to a meditation retreat in the Himalayas. It would be a great conversation at the next dinner party that they are going to. Like, they would be very fired up going to that meditation retreat. On the other hand, in the materialistic group, it would feel just like, really? Like, what am I going through? What am I doing here? There would be a lot more mental resistance to meditation. I think nonetheless, there would be probably some benefits, but there is this huge enthusiasm gap between the two groups, and it's not hard to see how that would modulate the outcomes. And the hippie groups would be harnessing much more of the benefits of meditation rather than the materialistic group, who would likely to be resisting it to some degree. So that meant to illustrate that the placebo effect, it's not about the sugar pill. Here in the Western world, we think of placebo as the sugar pill because we are conditioned to think of the pill as the medicine, and it's one form of medicine that we receive. But placebo is much more broad than that. It's really about your expectations and the mental attitudes about what is about to happen. The other important point about the placebo effect is that it's not binary, that it's either there or not, but rather you should think of it as a dose-response effect. If you're very enthusiastic about something, then it's likely that the effects are going to be greater. And some of the best experiments to demonstrate this were done in performance enhancement with cyclists. One of the classic studies was done by Christopher Beatty from the University of Canterbury. And what he did is that he invited professional athletes, professional cyclists into his lab. And there were 3 groups. The first one, he just told them straight up that you're going to get placebo. The second group, he told them that they are going to receive a moderate level of caffeine, and caffeine is known to enhance cognitive performance. And for the third group, he told them that they are going to receive a high dose of caffeine. And then, they had this 3 group, and then everybody did, I think it was a 10-kilometer speed run. And for the group that has received the moderate level of, I forgot to say is that, of course, everybody got placebo. So they've been told that they're going to get the caffeine. Everybody got the exact same water. So anyway, and then they did the timing, and then what they find is that compared to baseline, when they've been told that it's just a placebo, for the moderate caffeine group, there was a performance increase of 1.3%, And for the people who have been told that it's a high caffeine, there was a performance increasement of 3.1%. Now, I know 3.1% does not sound much, but these were professional athletes. If you're a professional athlete who is training every day and night, then that 3.1% increase in performance, that's actually a very significant one. So those are the two key points that I want you to know about placebo before we proceed, that it's about your psychological expectations and that it's a dose-response sort of thing. The more enthusiastic you are about something, the more likely that there is to be a big response. So what about the placebo effect in the context of psychedelics? And one of my favorite experiments on this topic was done actually not far from here, uptown at the Mount Sinai Hospital by Harold Abramson in 1955. And what he did is that he first put together a questionnaire about the effects of LSD. It was a questionnaire that was meant to gauge whether people are on LSD or not. Then he invited people into his laboratory, and he told them that, hey, you are about to receive LSD, and these are going to be the effects. It's like your palms are going to get moist, and you are going to feel a little bit like in a dream. So basically, he told the participants what to expect, then he gave them the placebo, and then sometime into the experiment, they went through to that questionnaire that he designed to gauge whether are on LSD or not. And these are the results. So these are the questions that he asked the people. And this is the numbers next to them are the percentage of respondents who answered positively that given item. If you run your eyes through these numbers, then roughly about 1/3 of the people answered yes to every single question. And like, are your palms moist? 60%. Like, I'm sure, some of the palms of some of you in the audience is moist right now, but probably not 60%. And also, like, it's probably like, not 25% of you feel like being in a dream. And these results should be especially suspicious to you because remember that these people were just told that they are about to receive LSD that is going to make your palms moist and it's going to make you feel like you are in a dream. And if you read this whole paper, then actually there are some absolutely crazy quotes in it. So this is straight from the research paper. The subject has such a severe response to the placebo that considerable care was required to maintain an experimental situation that was not traumatic. And the very end of the paper, they say, it was found by us that for a given group of individuals, a suitable evaluation of response to LSD 25 could not be made without the use of a zero-dose control group. So there's some pretty heavy statements. And what I would also like you to notice is that this study was done in 1955, which is really just when psychedelic research has begun. So people notice this intricate link between the placebo effect and psychedelics, not somewhere in the middle of the road, but as soon as they have started experimenting with psychedelics. It is also not by accident that it is from the same era where the notion of set and setting has emerged. I am sure that many of you know that this is a term that was coined by Timothy Leary, who was a Harvard psychiatry professor turned psychedelic priest. And what he meant by set and setting is that depending on your mindset, the set, and the physical and social environment of a psychedelic trip, the setting, is going to fundamentally change how that experience is going to unfold. And this whole set and setting theory should sound a lot like the placebo effect. And indeed, I think the right way to think about them is that they're basically just two sides of the same coin. Both of them are about how our expectations, preparations, intentions, and the sociocultural setting of the experience is going to modulate the experience. Essentially, both of these theories states that if you're taking a drug, it's going to have an innate physiological effect. But on top of that, there's going to be this additional layer of extra pharmacological effects. And the sum of these two is going to be your subjective drug experience. And both set and setting and placebo emphasizes that these extra pharmacological components of a drug experience should not be forgotten. Now, set and setting was conceptualized within the context of macrodoses, when you do a lot of LSD. This study was also done in the context of macrodosing. If you're taking the same LSD and decreasing the dosage to 10% to its original, when by definition the effects are just on the edge of perceivability, then all of these mental mind games and the importance of these psychological expectations are just going to become exponentially more important compared to the macrodose case. And that is why many people are suspicious of those anecdotal reports that are done without any placebo control. And actually, the situation is a lot worse that I am painting right now. Because people who are microdosing today, it's not a random selection of people. It's not your, I don't know, grandma and uncle who are microdosing. It's typically young people in the city who also typically have used psychedelics before. And many of them really enjoyed that psychedelic experience, and that's one of the reasons why they went on to do microdosing. So there is this prior positive expectation about psychedelics. Also, as we said, microdosing is currently not something that the doctor is going to prescribe to you. So there is going to be some hassle involved in setting it up. Like, at least you're going to need to meet some dodgy guy at the, some dark alley to get the acid, because in most places, psychedelics are not legal. Which also means that most microdosers are taking on some legal risk when they are doing microdosing. And all of this suggests to me is that probably people would not do microdosing if they would not expect at least some benefit in return. They wouldn't go through the hassle and the legal risk of doing microdosing if they would not think that it's not going to be beneficial for them. So what we have here is a situation where there are many good reasons to believe that there's going to be a strong placebo response. The effects are just on the edge of perceivability. Most people who are currently microdosing have positive preconceptions, and there is a strong expectation of a benefit. And all of these components just add up to this big perfect storm for a very strong placebo response. Remember that earlier I said that the placebo has this dose-response characteristic, meaning that the more you are believing in something, the more likely you to experience some benefits. And that is exactly the case here. There is a lot of good reasons to believe that people who are currently microdosing have a strong motivation or what's the right word? They have strong expectations about having a positive outcome from microdosing. Now, earlier I used the phrase that there is a motivated user base for microdosing, and I don't mean that they would be motivated to mislead the public about the benefits of microdosing. I don't question the honesty of those experience reports, not at all. Actually, I completely believe them. There is no conflict between the notion or the possibility that microdosing is a placebo versus people who are microdosing experiencing some benefit. The real question is whether those benefits are due to the innate pharmacological effect of the microdose, or they are due to those psychological expectation effects that we just discussed. And to actually be more precise, to some degree, the placebo effect is certainly accounting for the positive experiences that we see in these anecdotal reports. The real question is that there is more to microdosing than just the placebo effect. It's 100% sure that placebo plays a role in those experience reports, but is there more to microdosing than just a strong placebo response? So how we are going to find that out? That's really the million-dollar question when it comes to microdosing. How we are going to find that out? And there are basically two paths forward. And path A is that we wait for a big Silicon Valley investor to pick up the check. These studies are expensive, really expensive. And we tried this to some degree, and I know that other people are also looking around, and it just doesn't seem to be happening. And it's very frustrating because in the meantime, you can't really do anything. But there is also path B. And path B is to tap into our hippie creativity and design a study that has the placebo control in it, that will have a high enough sample size, participant number, so that we are going to get statistically significant results, and that is also cheap enough so that we can actually run it. And our best attempt at that is the self-blinding microdose study. Thank you. So the self-blinding microdose study, we are doing it together with the Imperial College London, the Beckley Foundation. We use the platform of the psychedelic survey. So this is an internet-based study where voluntary participants microdose at home at their own initiative, just like the other internet-based survey studies. But what is the key difference compared to us and other studies of this kind is that we are providing our participants a setup manual that basically explains self-experimenters how they can set up their own placebo control with simple household items like envelopes and zip bags. One of the great advantages of this being an internet-based survey study that it's completely global. People can do it from anywhere. It doesn't matter whether you're in Budapest, New York, Vancouver, whatever. You can, if you have internet connection, you can do it. But because it's an internet-based survey study, it also suffers from some of the same downsides of those other studies, namely that we cannot provide LSD for the participants. And the very simple reason for that is that if we would do that again, we would run up against the cost problem. Like, probably would be able to find money, I don't know, for 10, 20 people, but then it would be just another study that doesn't find anything that is convincing or statistically significant. And that is obviously a downside of the study, and I want to be very upfront about that. Scientifically, it would be better if we would be able to provide LSD for the participants, and I'm certainly sure our participants would also appreciate that, but the money just comes into the picture, and then we would not be able to do the study. And I want to come back to this, but before I would talk more in talk about that, I would like to talk a little bit more about how this whole study setup works, how you can add your own placebo control when microdosing. And this is really the key trick, and that is that our participants have to hide their microdose, which is just a small piece of a blotter paper, inside these non-transparent gel capsules. Obviously, it's very important that it has to be non-transparent, because for placebos, our participants are using just these empty gel capsules. So you put in the paper, you pop it, and then you are just preparing some identical capsules without the microdose in it. And that way, when you're taking one of these capsules, you do not know whether it's an empty one, a placebo capsule, or whether it's a microdose one with a little piece of paper inside. Now notice that if you would just prepare these capsules at random and then mix them in a bowl and you would pop one a day, that wouldn't really be science, because you need to give it more structure, because at least you need to be able to figure out when that participant was taking placebo versus microdose, so that at the end of the study you can do the comparison between the two groups. So you need to give it more structure. And this is the structure that we came up with. Now, before I get into the details of this figure, this is a figure from the manual that we are distributing. This is an overview figure. It's not meant to explain every single step, and I'm not going to do that either here. What I want to do is just to give you a feel for how it works. So the way that it works is that we have here what we call the standard schedule of the study. And what you can see here is that there are all of these capsules, and on this figure, the red ones are containing a microdose, the blue ones are empty, and there are also some days for which there is no capsule assigned. So the way the study works is that people are preparing these capsules. Note that there are like 8 weeks here. 4 of them involve microdose, and 4 of them only involve placebos. So there are all of these capsules, and then our participants are preparing them. And then what is not shown is that each of these capsules goes into an individual zip bag together with a day label, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, so that each capsule is assigned to a specific day. And then after that, the set of zip bags with the capsules inside, together with a QR code that we are providing, goes into an envelope. Then our participants are sealing that. And that is done for every week. They do it 8 times. Then after that, pairs of these envelopes and another set of QR codes goes into bigger envelopes. They do it 4 times. Then they shuffle it up, randomly select one. The 2 small envelopes inside, they are holding their capsules for week 1 and week 3 of the experiment. Then they have to generate a random number, find a QR code that's going to tell them a code that which matching other big envelope that they need to find to get weeks 2 and 4. And that's it. So this was just meant to be an overview for the process. For people who are interested in actually doing the study, on our website you can download this manual even without signing up for the study, and then you can see the details. And also on our website there is a YouTube video that shows in a very detailed manner how to set up the study. And the video that cross-references the manual, so it tells you that right now you are doing step 3.1. So for people who are interested in doing the study, we always encourage them to watch the video with the manual in hand so they can cross-reference their understanding. What I'd like you to notice first is that, so these are like the envelopes that are holding the capsules that participants are going to be using for their experiment. And note there are only 4 envelopes here, but originally there were 8 envelopes set up. So participants are only using half of that, and that is very much on purpose, because 4 of these are going to have the microdoses inside, and 4 of them only going to have the placebos. And remember that we want to get rid of the expectations. We don't want our participants to know anything about the likely distribution of the capsules that they are going to be taking during the dosing period of the study. When we designed the study, what we initially had in mind is people doing it with LSD and just cutting up the blotter, sort of like the classic method, but the study also can be done with volumetric dosing. The only difference is that instead of using capsules, people have to get these plastic vials that can hold the liquid. And then for the placebo, they just used liquid in which later they are going to dissolve the blotter. Not so relevant in the US, but people can also use legal LSD analogs. Like for example, in Canada, 1P-LSD, a close chemical cousin of LSD, can be sourced legally. And that is also a valid substance for the study. And also the study can be done with magic mushrooms. Then there is a little bit of a complication, because with mushroom, most people use 0.2 grams of a microdose. But if you would hold a capsule loaded with 0.2 grams, you would easily able to distinguish that from a placebo capsule, which is empty, based on their weight. So to come around that, for the mushroom protocol, the placebo capsules have to be filled with an equal weight of a non-psychoactive mushroom material. So notice that up to this point, I haven't said anything about the dose, that how much our participants should use, and we are basically not defining it. We are encouraging our participants to use a dose that they would use outside of the study as well. And there are 2 reasons for that. And reason number 1 is that before we officially launched the study, we made a little pilot study with a group of microdosers. And in that version of the protocol, there was a defined 12 micrograms dose. But many people complained that they want to do it with less. Even more people complained that they want to do it with more. So, we did not want to, too strongly, tell the people how to microdose, because then we knew that many people are just not going to do the study. So we wanted to give that freedom to the participants. And the other reason why we don't define it exactly is because even if we would define it, most participants just would not be able to set up the study like that. And that is because without expensive professional rate chemical testing, you just cannot know how much is on a tab. At this point, I often get some pushback, but my guy is very reliable. If he says it's 120, it's 120. No, it's not. It's actually very, very likely that it's much less than 120. It's likely going to be somewhere between 90 to 100. But anyway, the point is that even if we would tell participants to do it with 12 micrograms, they would not be able to set up the experiment because they have no idea how much is on the blotter on the blotter to start with. So everything that you need for the study, it costs about $20, like the envelopes and the zip bags. We provide Amazon links in the manual. And the setup time, it's roughly like, it takes about an hour if you watch the video before, and that's how we encourage participants to do, is to first watch the video together with the manual so that you know what you're doing. That's roughly takes 20 to 30 minutes. And then setting up the study, then it takes about another 40 minutes. So it's a little bit more than an hour overall. There's a fair amount of cut up this sheet and put everything into an envelope, seal that, mix them, shuffle them, randomly select one. But they're all easy steps, and it's all broken down into easy to follow instructions, both in the manual and in the video. So for the timeline of the study, as I said, there is a 4 weeks long dosing period in the study, but the study itself is much longer. It's 10 weeks, and that is because both before participants start dosing, after it, and 1 month after they stop, we make a more detailed personality assessment. These are somewhat long questionnaires that take about 70 minutes, but participants always have the whole week to complete them, and they can do it during multiple sessions. But really the meat of the study is this 4 weeks long dosing period, and during that time there are measurements every Thursday and Sunday, but they're much shorter. They take about 15-20 minutes to complete. And here during this dosing period, what we are focusing on is well-being effects. We are using questionnaires that are widely used in psychological research to assess the well-being and the mood of people, and also we are assessing cognitive performance. We teamed up with a company who specializes in browser-based measurement of cognitive functioning. So every Thursday, our participants need to fire up these browser games, and they play a computer game for 15-20 minutes that in return measures us how they are performing cognitively. Not surprisingly, our participants tend to be more enthusiastic about the cognitive tests than the questionnaires, but anyway, that's just a cool component that we were able to add to the study. I just want to say that the way so right now we are in the data collection phase of this study, and the last valid starting date for the experiment is going to be the end of November. We basically want to collect the data until the end of the year and then publish the results somewhere early next year. But if you're interested in participating, then bear in mind that it's going to be available starting at the end of November. And ideally, you should also register earlier because you need to do the setup, and that is also going to take some time. At this point, you might be asking yourself, but okay, who the hell is going to do this experiment? Like, you know, after all, we are not providing the LSD for the participants. It's admittedly takes some time and effort to set up the study, and it also takes some time to fill out the questionnaires, like what is in it for the participants? And the answer is that doing placebo-controlled microdosing is just 100 times cooler than straight-up microdosing. Because that, you know, when you take that capsule without knowing whether that's a microdose or just an empty one, that introduces this whole guessing game into the equation, that you do not know what is inside. And that forces to be very observant of yourself. If you know that you're microdosing, there's no surprise in the effects. But if you know there is this element of unknown, if you're adding this cell-blinding procedure to your microdosing routine. And what I should also mention here is that participants are completing all of the time points after they are done with the study. Then we are telling them how good was their guessing performance. At the end of every week, we asked our participants to guess which day was a placebo and which day was a microdose. And then at the end, you know, we basically feed that information back into the participants after all of the questionnaires are done. So you will have an idea, you know, how well you have guessed. And one of the most fun part of running this study has been when I see sometimes people on the internet bragging about, hey, I almost got all of my 12 micrograms right. And then somebody else comes along and I almost got all of my 10 micrograms microdoses right in the study. So anyway, the internet is a weird place, but some of that is going on. The other motivating factor seems to be for people is that most of our participants are people who say that they have benefited from microdosing, and because of that, they would like to accelerate the scientific development of microdosing. And then this is a good way to contribute to psychedelic science and help us to collect that data that is hopefully going to push forward the science of microdosing. I think one of the cooler aspects of this study is actually this whole citizen science project. People started microdosing, we took note, and then we designed a study together with the community. As I said, right from the beginning, we worked with microdosers, and there was a lot of back and forth in the exact protocol and the exact questionnaires that we ended up using. in many ways, it's a study that is crowdsourced. It's not crowdfunded because we are not asking for our participants money, but it's crowdsourced more like on the effort level. We are asking our participants some effort that is basically going to allow us to collect placebo-controlled data on microdosing while also having a study that is cheap enough so that we can actually do it. So now I'm going to leave behind the practicalities of the study and come back a little bit to the methodology and talk about why we think that this is such a cool idea. So let me start with the negative. So as I said, we don't give participants any drug, and because of that, there is a lack of control over the quantity and the quality of the drug. And obviously, this is something which is not preferable in science. But it is also not as bad as it initially sounds. And the reason for that is that LSD is a rarely adulterated drug. This study design would work much less well with, let's say, Coke or ecstasy pills, which are very, very frequently adulterated. And for LSD, like most of the adulterants, are substances like 1,P-LSD and ALD52. Both of them are close chemical cousins of LSD, and you can actually do the study with these substances. They are also long-acting psychedelic substances, so you would expect the results to be overlapping to a large degree. You also don't know the exact quantity of the drug that people are consuming, and again, it sounds bad, but it's probably not as bad as it initially sounds, because you expect, again, some dose-response relationship. You took bigger of a microdose, the effects are going to be somewhat bigger. But it would be very surprising to find out down the line that, say, at 12 micrograms of LSD, there is absolutely no effect, but at 15 micrograms, there is still like all these wonderful effects emerging. No, it's likely going to be more like a graded dose-response relationship between the dose and the effects. So because of these limitations, what our study is not going to be good at is to optimize microdosing. We will not be able to tell apart how 12 and 50 micrograms is going to affect people. But what is it going to be very good at is to find out whether there is like a mean effect, or what is the mean effect of microdosing. As I said at the very beginning of the presentation, microdosing is not a well-defined phenomenon, rather is this fuzzy concept. And our study will be able to see what is the average effect across this fuzzy space that people are calling microdosing. So enough of the negatives, let's talk about the cool stuff. So first and foremost, the study has placebo control, and that is by far the most important, and that's what makes this exciting. The second part is that it is going to have a very large sample size for a placebo-controlled study on psychedelics. Indeed, I can say that if we would stop data collection today, it would already be the largest placebo-controlled study ever conducted on psychedelics. And last but not the least, which is also really good about the study, is that the costs are minimal. So actually we can do the study. The study has the Imperial and the Beckley logo, so everybody thinks this is some well-funded project, but no, not at all. Like, our entire budget is well under $10,000, which is really nothing when you are talking about scientific research, yet we will be able to pull off all of these really, really cool features, basically for absolutely no money. So I want to come back to this evidence pyramid for one more second and try to place this study on here. And what's the interesting bit is that you can't really place it here because the study has like this mixture of elements from all over the place. It has this uncontrolled drug quantity and quality, which is tend to be unique for these lower level studies. But it has the placebo control, which is unique for these very high quality studies. So what's exciting about this study is that it basically mixes all of these elements, and actually I'm really looking forward to the peer review when we are going to have to argue with other scientists about the value of this methodology, because there is going to be real meat, real discussion here. There are admittedly some downsides, but we also have a lot of cool features with the placebo control and the very large sample size for a psychedelic study. To the best of our knowledge, this whole concept of self-blinding, that people are, where people are setting up their own placebo control, this is novel, not just within the context of psychedelics research, but more generally in medicine as well. I know that LSD and microdosing is cool and exciting, but personally, we, the research group, is much more excited about the methodology. We just started setting up a study about the difference between various cannabis strains, how the ratios of different cannabis is going to affect the medical quality of the high that you get from the plant. There is going to be a self-blinding smoking study. So what I would just like to close with is that the point of this study is not that this is going to be the best study ever done on microdosing. If there would be money available and other resources, then we would be able to design a much better study than this. But this study is very good at getting high-quality evidence out from this low-resource environment of psychedelic science. It's very good value for money. The point of this study is that we are trying to get from the current anecdotal level of evidence to the higher level studies, the randomized clinical studies, and we think that this study will be that stepping stone between the two. What we hope is that this study is really going to accelerate that process to move towards the well-controlled clinical studies. And also because we are going to have a very large sample size, this study is going to be very good at generating a hypothesis that then can be followed up in the better controlled randomized studies. For MAPS to get to where they are currently with the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, it took them multiple decades to get there where they are from. And we think that this study is going to significantly shorten that time frame in the for the case of microdosing. So last but not the least, I would just like to acknowledge my collaborators on this. I'm working with the Imperial College Psychedelics Research Group. I worked with David on MDMA earlier, and when I had this idea for the self-blinding study, I immediately emailed him, and he was stupid enough to say yes. At that time, we had no idea how much work it is going to be. Also, right now, there's been, I don't know how many hundreds of hours we have put into this. We don't get any money for this. As I said, we are operating on an extremely low budget for a science study, but we are all putting in all these long hours because we are just too excited not to do so. But all of our work would really need to nothing if people wouldn't do this study. So really, our greatest gratitude goes towards every participant who has completed the study or will complete the study. With their contribution, we will be really able to push forward the science of psychedelics microdosing. Thank you very much.